Hello, and welcome to another short lecture from Chapter 3 in your textbook. So, today I want to talk to you a little bit about culture, gender, and identity, as well as the idea of self fulfilling prophecy. One of the things that your book makes clear is that your sense of self, your idea of who you are, is shaped by the culture in which you've been raised. The fancy word for this is ideology. And cultural ideology has been working on you in ways that you might not recognize your entire life, and indeed even before you were born. So, for example, if your name is John or Larry or Bob or Richard, then chances are your parents named you that because they were having a boy. Likewise, if your name's Helen or Tracy, chances are they named you that because you're a girl. And these are examples of names that were culturally reinforced, culturally suggested in a way, right? That were gender based. And there's no real reason to name your kid Bob just because he's a boy, other than the fact that this is something that has been culturally enforced. And of course, they probably gave you a name before you even got here, right? So as a result, you see that culture influences your idea of self and who you are even before you're born. Now, there are, of course, important differences, rather, between Eastern and Western cultures. So, in Western culture, which is we're a Western culture here in the United States, we're very individualistic. We're very interested in the rights of the individual. In Eastern cultures, so in Asia, for example, or many Asian cultures, they live in collectivist cultures, where we're more interested in the well-being of the group than the individual person. And of course, these focuses determine how we think of ourselves, right? What's more important, me, or are my rights more important than the rights of the group? These kinds of questions, the answers to these kinds of questions, are influenced by the culture that you grow up in, and it influences how you think about yourself, particularly in relationship to other people. Now, of course, even within Western culture, we have co-cultures or subcultures that we are oftentimes part of. There are all kinds of examples. So you might be you might consider yourself to be part of a co-culture as a young person, as a millennial. That's a co-culture. You might consider yourself to be part of a co-culture as a Christian or as a Muslim, right? These are all different cultures that exist within a larger culture, and they, of course, have their own rules and ideas and ideologies that affect how we think of ourselves and how we think of ourselves in relationship to other people. And these can have profound influences on our day-to-day communication behaviors. Now, as I've already sort of hinted at, sex and gender also affect the way we think about ourselves, right? So being male or female influences how others communicate with us. It affects the kind of pronouns that people use. It affects the kind of nicknames that we might get. And of course, there are all kinds of gender-based expectations with regard to behavior. So, for example, the idea, men aren't supposed to cry. This is a gender-based cultural expectation. There's no written rule anywhere that says, hey, men aren't supposed to cry, but we get this message early as young men, and it continues with us throughout life. It's a cultural expectation that in a way has been forced on us, and we've just come to believe is the way that things are. This is what ideology does. It convinces you, hey, this is just the way things are. Common sense says guys aren't supposed to cry, right? Common sense says that a young man's room is supposed to be blue and a young girl's room is supposed to be pink. Now, interestingly, if you go back about 150 years, it was the other way around. Little boys' rooms were pink and little girls' rooms were blue. Excuse me. So we see that gender and sex, cultural expectations change over time as well. So it's important to consider context, where you are and what kind of situation you're in, right? And how this affects the expectations that go with being a man or a woman. Another example would be the fact that assertiveness is valued as a trait in males. If you're assertive as a man, people generally in our culture think that's a good thing. When we have studies, for example, that show people study groups videos of assertive women, the reaction is almost universally negative. Indeed, they oftentimes describe an assertive woman as being quote unquote bitchy. So you see right there, this is a cultural expectation that's forced on women and honestly isn't fair. Nonetheless, it's something that exists and something that unfortunately we have to deal with. So again, these expectations are culturally enforced largely. Now I should mention before we go any further, for the sake of the rest of the semester and for understanding what I'm talking about when I'm talking about sex and gender, there is a difference. So sex is biological. So it's what you got on you. It's what you were born with. Your sex is determined. You're born a man or a woman. Gender, however, is culturally constructed. It's a cultural construction. It's made up of social ideas about being a man or a woman, right? So when I talk about sex, I'm talking about your physical sex. And when I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about the idea of masculinity, for example, or the idea of femininity, and the cultural expectations that come with those roles. I hope that makes sense. Next, I want to talk to you a little bit about self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is one of the more interesting elements in this chapter. So for definition's sake, self-fulfilling prophecy occurs when a person's expectations of an event and his or her subsequent behavior based on those expectations make the event more likely to occur than otherwise would have been true. Now that's the book definition, and it's kind of hard to unpack. I know it's kind of unwieldy. But what we can say is that self-fulfilling prophecy happens, for example, if you're going to hit a golf shot and you expect to do well, you probably will. Right? The idea is if you expect to do well on a test, you'll probably study for it and as a result do well on that test. Now, I know this sounds funny, but it's a very real thing. We know that self-fulfilling prophecy is very real. So there are 4 stages to a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the first one is you have to hold an expectation. So I think I'm going to drive the golf ball down the middle of the fairway. Then I have to behave in accordance with that expectation. I have to act as if I'm going to strike that ball so that it goes right down the middle of the fairway. Then I hit it down the middle of the fairway, and when I do, it reinforces my original expectation. What's important to recognize about these 4 stages are that, to an extent, they indicate that we become what we believe. If you expect to do well, you probably will. If you expect people to like you, they probably will. If you expect to do poorly, you probably will. If you expect people to not like you, they probably won't like you. So, there are 2 types of self-fulfilling prophecy. We can impose self-fulfilling prophecy on ourselves, right? So it can be self-imposed. Right? We could expect to do well and then do well because our expectations influence our behavior. At other times, self-fulfilling prophecy can be imposed by others. And this is important. This is on the test. So other people can impose prophecies on us. Now this is really interesting. One study that your book cites shows that 20% of a class were told that they were gifted, right? This was not based on any kind of real testing, right? They were just told, hey, 20% of you, right, 2 out of 10, you're gifted. You're really bright students. They just told them this. And 8 months later, they tested them and found that the people who were told that they were more intelligent than their peers learned more, had greater gains in their IQ than their classmates. We did a similar experiment with welders in terms of aptitude, how quickly they learned to be welders. And what we found was that if we went into classes and told welding students, hey, you guys right here in this group, you guys are really good at this. You are natural born welders. Just telling them this helped them learn twice as fast. So you see, what's happening there is that we're imposing self-fulfilling prophecies on others. We're telling people, you're really good at this. And then they act as if they are. And they make it real. Now, I suggest to you, this has really important kinds of ramifications. Think about, for example, people with post-traumatic stress disorder. We've found in studies of people with PTSD that if you treat, for example, a soldier that's come home from war and has really been traumatized by it, if we treat them as if they're victims, quote unquote, right? If we tell, oh, poor you, oh, you've been through so much, this is terrible, I don't know how you can even function, right? If we tell them that they're victims and treat them as if they're hopeless victims, then their PTSD gets worse instead of better, right? So what this suggests, of course, is that if you're a parent or if you're a teacher, for example, like I am, you want to tell people, hey, listen, you're going to do great on this. You want to try and impose that self-fulfilling prophecy on people so that they can make it come true. And again, this is a very real thing. All right, that's it for today. I hope you learned something, and we'll talk about impression management next time. Thanks again for watching.